Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. A while back, we did a breakdown of the 7th episode of the Ahsoka series, and we took a look at how Grand Admiral Thrawn basically set his enemies up for failure by employing some really brilliant strategies. He was one step ahead at every stage of the operation. It was a brilliant move by Thrawn to release Sabine Wren into the wild with a mount and provisions so that she could easily travel as far away from his position as possible.
Sabine Wren will have the opportunity of finding Ezra Bridger, just as promised. And if she does, you and your master will destroy them both.
What made this strategy even better was the fact that when Ashoka Tano appeared in the galaxy out of nowhere in pursuit of Thrawn, instead of heading to Thrawn's position, she goes directly to Sabine and Ezra's location instead.
Which is why we must control all variables. Put her on a path of her own choosing, so that no matter which direction she takes, we'll always be one step ahead of her.
On top of that, Thrawn was able to set up a space minefield that prevented a large pack of Purrgil from ramming into the Eye of Sion, which would have left everyone stranded on this planet. It was honestly really heartwarming seeing the Purrgils take damage for a change. I think a lot of people like to assume that these Purrgil are just like the friendly whales in our ocean, which are generally benign and peaceful, when in reality Purrgils kill more spacers than, drinking and flying does. Anyway, Thrawn had a clear goal in this operation: protect the loading of thousands of caskets onto his Imperial-class Star Destroyer, the Chimera, from the catacombs below the Night Sisters' fortress, and preserve the integrity of his forces by exposing them only to engagements in which they can win. Even though Baylan Skoll basically abandons Thrawn's forces here,
Recall the gunships, call off the aerial pursuit. These are unfortunate, but acceptable losses given the absence of Lord Baylan.
And his stormtroopers and Shin Hati are forced to retreat. Ahsoka, Ezra, and Sabine have been contained, leaving them in a really bad position to pursue Thrawn.
Ashoka Tano has lost the one thing she could not afford to lose today. Time.
Overall, it was a textbook distract your enemies, mislead them so that your other forces can disengage from the conflict. This is a period of time in which Thrawn's forces are at their most vulnerable, and the Grand Admiral did an amazing job at buying his troops time. But what happens in the finale afterwards is, it's just really not great in my opinion. And so in this video, I will be taking a look at Thrawn's many surprising mistakes in the finale. And yes, there will be a lot of nitpicking here, so I apologize beforehand if certain audience members get annoyed by that kind of stuff, but these are the kind of things that I think about, my crazy ass thinks about when I'm watching these shows. If me and Conga were sitting and watching the finale together, what I'm about to say in this video is what I would point out. I have many character flaws in life, and one of them is not being able to suspend belief in combat scenes for a show that clearly does not focus on combat. Sometimes it's really hard for me to keep my thoughts in my head, so I have to just, out. If you really like the finale for the Ahsoka series, more power to you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think a lot of good things actually happened. So please don't let my extreme nitpicking here detract from your enjoyment of the show. This is my little guilty pleasure. So in the previous episode, Thrawn made it a point that he wanted to deploy limited amounts of assets due to the poor condition of his military forces. He's been stuck on this godforsaken world for more than a decade, and they're running out of troops. And this is something him and Morgan Elsbeth clash a lot about.
Prepare to attack squads. Wait for Lord Baylan's signal.
Should we not send more troops to support them?
During this exile, I'm not.
See that? Thrawn paused for 4 seconds there. I counted actually. And, he's a brilliant guy. He thinks really, really quickly. The fact that he paused for 4 seconds should be terrifying for everyone. I think ultimately Thrawn really likes Morgan Elsbeth, or he at least appreciates how useful she is. But I feel like in this scene where he pauses, he's really just fighting the urge to push her off of the fortress. The point is, this is not the Thrawn we know from the early Empire period in the canon novels. This Thrawn is a bit more deranged and emotionally imbalanced because, again, he's been stuck on this stupid planet for 10 years. But anyway, Thrawn keeps on mentioning how, his forces have taken a lot of casualties, and so he wants to basically keep them intact and not use them too much. Remember, he doesn't really care if Ahsoka and her friends die here, it's just an added benefit. What he really cares about is getting away from this planet, returning to the old galaxy, and also not having any stowaways. And so I think the real reason why Thrawn isn't willing to commit large amounts of forces early on in this battle to destroy Ahsoka and company is because the Jedi and the Rebels have proven to be very unpredictable in the past. I mean, the whole reason why Thrawn is in this situation was because Ezra managed to pull a space whale fleet out of nowhere and use it to destroy as many ships as possible. And so I guess Thrawn wants to keep all of his resources ready to go in case something crazy happens, and so he's playing it very conservative here. But now that all the enemy forces are engaged on the planet's surface and all of the whales are more or less out of the picture.
You're certain there's only the one starship?
Correct, Grand Admiral. Our fighters have already engaged the target and pursued them into the debris field.
Excellent. That'll be all, Captain.
Thrawn should have really focused on destroying the Jedi while they're on the ground, or at least harassing them so they can't make it all the way to his Star Destroyer. I think withdrawing the stormtroopers from that first battle was a good idea. They were gonna lose that fight no matter what. Throwing Shin Hati away is not great, but I guess after seeing how unreliable Balin's skull is, Thrawn probably wants nothing to do with his apprentice. Thrawn seems to think that most apprentices are very similar to their masters.
However, we are getting to know our adversary. And if she's anything like her master, she'll be unpredictable and quite dangerous.
But the second he withdraws those stormtroopers in those gunships, he should have sent a second wave to attack them and keep them pinned down. Remember, Professor Huyang's Jedi shuttle is still intact here, and with it they maintain their mobility and also ability to board the Star Destroyer. And at the same time, guys, Thrawn has really no reason to keep his ship docked to the Zepho fortress, because literally in the first scene this happens.
Grand Admiral, the cargo transfer is complete.
Good.
This means the Star Destroyer doesn't need to be connected to the ground anymore. They can basically leave, and we know that despite it being heavily damaged, the Chimera still has its repulsor lifts active, so it can fly underneath its own power. The funny thing is, Thrawn keeps telling Morgan Elsbeth over here not to underestimate the Jedi.
There is little the Jedi can do to stop us now.
I've watched many an Imperial officer make the same assumptions about the rebellion. Even I fell victim to the heroics of a single Jedi. I thought it was beyond you to underestimate a Jedi.
Look who's underestimating the Jedi now, Thrawn. I mean, what are you doing with your ISD parked there? Are you trying to run the meter dry?
Bring the Eye of Sion out of high orbit so that we may begin the interlocking procedure.
Look, I understand that the Chimera might not make orbit by itself, but why not just move the ISD a few hundred meters, away from this docking location so that Ezra can't just double jump onto the ship? Also, why keep the hangar door open like that? I mean, everyone closes their trunk before they start driving. This is a big misstep here. And for those of you who bring up the good point that maybe an Imperial-class Star Destroyer needs to be completely still for a hyperdrive ring to dock to it, well, first, that's not how smaller hyperdrive rings work. The ship usually flies into the ring, not the other way around. And two, that Imperial-class Star Destroyer is already still. It's not actually being supported by the pedestal. Its repulsor lifts are what's keeping it up. Similar to how the Imperial-class Star Destroyer above Jeddah was just chilling in midair without any movement. And so they could have completely docked the Imperial-class Star Destroyer if it was just floating like 500 meters higher in a place where no one could board it. And then Captain Enoch comes out with this crucial piece of information.
Comscan believes they have a fix on the Jedi shuttle's location.
Dispatch 2 TIE fighters if they find their mark. Tell them to engage.
So they have a lock-on Ahsoka's position now, great. Yet they only send 2 TIE fighters to take out Ahsoka's Jedi shuttle. There's at least a dozen TIE fighters left, along with those really cool looking fighters that Morgan Elsbeth brought with her. If I were Thrawn, I would not have underestimated the Jedi, and I would have sent, I don't know, at least a squadron of fighters to make sure that they stay on the ground, or in the ground. Now, on the other hand, I have no idea what Ahsoka and her crew are doing here, just slowly flying over these nomadic turtle dudes. Like, where's the sense of urgency? Aren't they worried that Thrawn's just gonna leave? I mean, do they realize that he's about to leave? And why are they flying right on top of the villagers at such a slow speed? They're not really helping these villagers, aside from maybe providing some shade. I don't know. If anything, their presence here puts everyone at danger. If they are actually trying to, provide an escort or overwatch for these villagers, they should be higher in the sky in a place where they have a vantage point and can see, I don't know, 2 TIE fighters coming in for a strafing run. Clearly, terrain masking does not work very well against Star Wars sensors. Luckily for Thrawn, the 2 TIE fighter pilots he sends are very skilled. I mean, most TIE fighter pilots are going to be very skilled. They go through this ruthless training pipeline, and only the most talented individuals can become fighter jockeys. This is why the TIE fighter design never made any sense to me. I mean, they put so much resources in training these pilots, and then they put them in these very basic starfighters without even the most rudimentary safety devices built onto them. Anyway, these TIE fighters do a great job and are able to disable the Jedi shuttle's engines on their first strafing run. They proceed to miss everything after that. Typical plot armor maybe. And they also get taken out in a really badass scene. I like this scene a lot. We kind of saw Han Solo do this in his own film during the Kessel Run. But yeah, one of the best ways to show how fragile a ship is without deflector shields is by doing this. But if Thrawn had an entire starfighter squadron here, this shuttle would have never even had a chance to get off the ground. And the threat of these Jedi boarding the Chimera would have been completely stopped here. I don't care how strong Ahsoka is, she's not going to be able to take on 12 different fighters coming from different directions. It just won't happen. Now, Thrawn gets a very, kind of incomplete picture of what happens here.
The TIE fighters made contact with the enemy and engaged.
Results?
A successful strike on the Jedi shuttle was reported before we lost contact with the flight group.
An acceptable outcome.
But Thrawn weighs out all the possibilities and he comes to the right conclusion about what happened here.
Assuming the Jedi ship is downed, the options to prevent our departure are now severely limited, if not impossible. Which is why we should prepare for a ground assault.
So he knows that the Jedi now have limited mobility because their ship has been downed, and how he reacts, well, this is what really bothers me. Instead of moving his ship again, just a bit further away from this stupid giant pedestal, he reluctantly calls on his night troopers to engage in a desperate rear guard action. These are these precious troopers that, remember, he didn't want to waste before. He even seems to kind of care or feel bad that he's turning them into zombies to increase their combat effectiveness.
Those are the volunteers.
Yes, Grand Admiral.
They were made of where?
They were.
Look, I know Filoni wants to add something cool, like a mishmash of what the Death Troopers were in Legends, but I feel like this whole scene was just so poorly executed. The choreography is so bad. I mean, in general, choreography seems to suffer a lot in larger set-piece battles in the recent Filoniverse shows. You guys remember the battle in Kenobi, right? When they were just firing point blank at each other? Do you guys also remember the cringy scooter kids chase in Book of Boba Fett? This goes beyond nitpicking. These are just objectively terrible action sequences where they didn't really spend any money on the choreography. It kind of reminds me of those old TV shows from the 90s, like on the Sci-Fi Channel, that just didn't look that great. Streaming is supposed to make TV shows closer to movie level quality, and that all starts with, again, the choreography and planning of these scenes, and judging by how awesome the earlier duels between Baylan Skoll and Ahsoka are, and some of the other sequences, the battle between Sabine and the bandits, for instance, was decent. I just don't understand how the zombie thing was so bad. I mean, not at one point was I worried that our heroes might get overwhelmed. I feel like they just really phoned it in, or they didn't have an idea on how to do the choreography here, but this scene it really stunk for me, guys. Although the black Death Trooper, Night Trooper things, those guys were a bit more scary. They did a good job with that. But anyway, I like my action sequences. Disney clearly has the skills to do this. It's just about whether they want to spend the money to make these scenes better. And I feel like they should. They really should at this point. The worst thing that happens, though, is Thrawn's sacrifice of Morgan Elsbeth as the last line of defense. And she does a good job holding Ahsoka back just long enough so that she can't make it onto the ship and bring it down. But I feel like her sacrifice at the end was a slap in the face to the character. I mean, first, I think Diana Lee Inosanto has one of the better performances in the series, and it kind of sucks hearing her go. But also because the reason that these 3 Jedi are at Thrawn's doorstep is because of Thrawn's hubris and inability to properly assess the threats that he faced here. He had multiple opportunities to prevent this from happening. He could have done something as easily just lifted his ship in the air just a little tiny bit. And what makes things even worse is that this entire time he's constantly lecturing Morgan Elsbeth about not making the very mistakes he's made up until this point. And that's why Morgan Elsbeth's sacrifice is a bit messed up. And it's really thanks to her that only Ezra Bridger makes it onto Thrawn's ship. But if you really think about it, losing Morgan Elsbeth here is going to be a huge blow to Thrawn. She single-handedly brought him back to the Star Wars galaxy. And she didn't get lucky. I mean, this was an intricate and complex plan that had a lot of different moving parts, and she somehow executed all of this perfectly. Morgan Elsbeth understands logistics, manufacturing, management. She's run gigantic shipyards. She's an industrial tycoon. She's also a witch who knows how to do martial arts. Like, what? She even built one of the most impressive prototype ships we've seen in recent Star Wars, the Eye of Sion, for a task that, frankly, no one has tried to tackle before, which is to travel to another galaxy. She is extremely valuable to Thrawn's movement, and even more importantly, she is deadly loyal. She could have posed a huge threat to the New Republic, but now Thrawn doesn't have her because he made a few mistakes. Well, technically, Thrawn actually orders her death by firing on that fortress with those turbolasers. There's no way she died from the gut wound. And by the time the turbolasers start hitting the structure, Sabine and Ahsoka were gone anyway. And so there we have it. I guess you guys can tell by now, I'm not so thrilled of the portrayal of Thrawn by Dave Filoni. I've actually been talking about this for months now. It was one of the major worries I had coming into this series, but honestly, seeing Baylan Skoll come out as such a terrific character made me worry less, I guess. I also have to say, guys, I'm a huge Thrawn fan. I've read everything, Legends, canon, and so I am a bit biased about his portrayal, and I get a bit sensitive about it. So, you know, it's character flaw. I have made peace with the fact that he's a straight-up villain now. I understand the character arc he must take, and that the rational and even good Thrawn is no longer a thing. But at least make Thrawn cunning and a challenge to fight. I like that he's become more emotional and more prone to making mistakes, but it just felt silly in this last episode, especially when in the 7th episode you do such a great job at making him seem like a strategic mastermind. The Ahsoka series has done a lot of things right. For instance, I love Lars Mikkelsen's portrayal of Thrawn. I think he's done an excellent job. I mean, he absolutely nails the delivery of the dialogue. So there you have it, guys. That is my review of Thrawn's many, many mistakes. I know in hindsight it's easy to do this, but guilty pleasure. Also, let me know in the comment section below what you guys think. What are the glaring mistakes that really stood out for you during this battle? Or maybe you really liked the battle. Maybe you guys can defend Thrawn's actions. I look forward to reading all of that. I'll see you guys next time. My name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.